What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over Supers Part 3. So Supers Part 3 is pretty cool because we have quite a few things that we can cover in this episode. I've kind of gone with a freeform approach to just add a bunch of mechanics that I think belong in Supers. However, we can continuously update these in future episodes and other installments like that. So some of the things I want to show off today. I want to remove the HUD entirely when performing super, both when doing the startup animation and when doing the actual super move. Now, if you're playing a game like Street Fighter, specifically I'm thinking of Street Fighter 5 with its critical arts, I know that you do have moves that function just like this. You perform an action. I have to actually use my cheat here so that I have full super. I perform an action, right? Everything disappears, I use my move. Now, if my move misses, I don't go into the other move. Okay, I don't go into the full combo. If I run this again, and I am to hit my opponent, then I go into the cinematic effect, you know, with the animation going, and the damage being dealt, and everything. Alright, I've reset this so that the timer doesn't keep going down. We end up going into different rounds and making things confusing. So, take a look at the time we have now. I'm going to fill up my super bars again, and we're going to use our move. So if I perform my action now, you can see that the HUD disappears, and the time actually stops when I'm performing that action. So check again. See how the time is at 83 seconds. When I come out of the cinematic effect that we did with the camera movement and all, then you saw that it was still at 83 seconds. The time actually stopped. And this is good because a lot of super moves, they may have varying lengths in terms of their actual cinematics or their little animations beforehand. On top of it, not only does the time stop here, but when I actually start this sequence after landing the hit, the timer actually stopped as well. So we'll be covering both those fixes to the timer where you can adjust and modify when you want the time to be running and when you don't want to be running the timer down. I'm going to actually close this one more time because, again, I don't want the round to end while we're covering these topics. It makes things more confusing. So let's start fresh. And so let's trigger our full super meter again. So you can see when I go to my opponent, if I am to attack them and they're in view, well, actually, I just missed it. He wasn't in view. 1 second. You can see if the opponent is in view, they are not animating at all. Their animation is completely stopped. I actually disabled their time, basically their tick. They're not actually performing their animation anymore. They're idle or whatever state they were in. So they will get locked into the state they're in. So say they go to attack. You can see I started doing the punch with this character, but it actually froze them where they were at. It allowed them to continue their move when they were done, but now we have actor time dilation working during supers. Another mechanic we'll be covering is using our super meter appropriately. Now, we actually have the logic to make our super meters work, and we have for a while, but we never did it for our commands. We only did it for the specific button presses. Well, now we've removed all of our button presses, and we do everything via the command list and the input buffer. So now we have to swap that over to work with our command list. So we're going to do all that today, and honestly more. So there's quite a lot going on, but it's going to make our supers a lot better of an experience to use. They're going to feel a lot better, and they're going to be more professionally done. On top of all of that, I know for sure that we've also disabled the movement for the enemy player when they are both in the combo and when they are when the startup for the super is playing. That's nice. That's a very important feature because if the character can move in those things, kind of defeats the purpose of a lot of the setup that you would do. Maybe you get your opponent in a specific spot before using a super so you can hope to land it. So another great mechanic we'll be covering. Anyway, let's hop into it. So what we should do is go into our code first. But if you have not watched any episode of the series, this is episode 109. We have many, many episodes to go. If you want to get caught up in the series, I'll link the iCard to the playlist right here in the top right corner of this video. Otherwise, you may want to check out the other logic we've done for the super moves because this is part 3 of supers, so the first 2 parts, we're going to build on that and make the logic better. So you might want to check out part 1 of supers if that's all you care about. All right, and here we are. So in the code today, we have quite a few things we're going to add. We're not going to change too many things. We're mainly going to be adding things. But one thing in particular that is super important is our meter cost. So some moves, we're talking about X attacks and meter burn attacks and super moves, can have a cost that they require the user or the character to have before they can be performed. We never actually implemented that. Again, we implemented kind of hard, specific values for moves that, okay, if you're pressing the special attack key, then you have to make sure that you use the super meter before performing it. But we don't use that logic anymore. Everything's done through the command list. And so the specific commands should have a cost to them. We can only perform them if we have the required meter. So if you scroll down your code, I've gone to my F command structure, and I've added this variable here, a required meter variable. You can call this whatever you want, but really this is going to be the amount of meter that is required. Right now, we're still using the standard progress bar logic, which is 0.0 to 1.0, basically 0 to 100%. It's a ratio between 0 and 1. So 0.8 would be 80%. That's why I've left it a float, so we can do it like that. If you want to make it an integer, it's not a problem. You can compare it however you want, or whatever's easiest for you to visualize. I'm perfectly fine with the float, at least for now, and so I don't have any issues with that. I am going to just call it required meter and make it a float. If you look at the character's combo state enum as well, you'll see that we've added a new entry here, and I've called it in super. Essentially, this is just if the character is being currently animated and attacked in a super move. The reason I give it a specific state is because if these supers are going to be more cinematic, a lot of the times we kind of cut corners with some of the things that we want to do. Like if we want to deal damage, we're not going to spawn a hitbox there because really it's not something that could miss. We're in the super move already. We want to make sure the opponent is dealing the damage, and the hitbox would be wonky anyway, depending on how cinematic or how crazy your animations are. You might be picking the character up and suplexing them. You might be throwing your character, at some random object that's spawned in the scene for the super. They can be very, very dramatic and very special. It would be kind of awkward to try and create hitboxes there. So in the previous episodes of the supers, we just called the take damage function and didn't give it any of the actual hitbox data. We just did a bunch of the logic to deal the damage, with the proper stun, whatever. But now, what we can do instead, since we have this combo state enum, is add a new state. And whenever the character is in this state, they can't do anything. Worse than can move. We won't allow them to do anything or take control of themselves in any way. So for now, I'm not going to go through and change all the logic to support this enum because we're already covering a lot in this episode. But just know, you can add an enum like this and you can fully control what you want to happen. So what I'm going to do is disable can move, but also put them in the state where they can't do anything relating to attacking or moving or getting out of the super. We don't want the character to have any mobility. We don't want the player to have any control over the character. All right. So make sure you add this state to the enum, e-combo state. You can add it as, again, whatever you'd like, whatever you want to call it. And let's actually approach that first because there's only one thing that we need to really take into account there. There are other places, like we don't want them to be able to jump and things when in that state. But again, can move already covers that, so you don't have to worry about it. The main one we care about right now is going to be the move right function. And we don't have to actually change anything with it. If you scroll down and move right, the actual logic to move the character has this condition at the end of it. And combo state is equal to none. They can only move right or left if the combo state is equal to none. Well, the combo state is going to be equal to in super. So we're going to take away all abilities, regardless of what can move is. We're going to take away all their actual actions that they can do in this function. So it's essentially can move on steroids because we'll actually include it in additional places as well. Move right controller is the same. And now let's look at what we actually would like to do regarding the super logic, because there's going to be some changes that we have to do to make it work with our system. So let's go to take damage. And let's think about this for a second. So we don't necessarily want the hit stop or the hit stun or block stun variables to be set when the opponent is being hit by a super move. Because if they are, and they don't fit the animation, they could make things weird. They might make it, A, less cinematic, and B, it might just genuinely need to be tweaked to work with the animations. It could actually throw a super move off. But we still want to be able to take damage and take health away from the player when hits are landing. A very, very simple solution is to do this. If you go to the take damage function, we had a boolean is defeated from hit, and then we had all this other logic that we've made from many, many episodes in the series. Well, we can encompass everything except this boolean, because we will need it in both cases, in another if statement. I just check to see if the combo state is not equal to in super before doing our standard take damage logic. To show you how much I put in here. Okay, all of this is the ending bracket. So everything in here was the logic we already had in take damage. We also actually had this at the end. But basically, everything in take damage except for this boolean and the very last statement I just showed you belong in if combo state not equal to this new combo state. We're going to write our own logic for the damage that we want to deal and any other effects that we want to do when the character is in a super. So regardless if it's super damage or a regular hitbox, of course we want to take away the player's health. That makes sense, and that's what we should do. We also want to make sure to check if the player is defeated from this damage. You can also add specific effects in here if you'd like related to the super. You could call other functions that are related to it. But for now, I have the essentials. I'm allowing everything else to be handled by the animations and by the supers themselves. I don't want to, again, spawn hitboxes. I don't want to check if they're blocking at this point. I don't want to play the same sound effects every single time the damage occurs. All these things I want removed. So else, if the character state is in super and they're taking damage, these are the only things that I'm doing. Removing the health and checking to see if they've been defeated or not. Then this is actually the same as it was too. So if the character is defeated from the hit, then we do the standard logic that we have done. Nothing's changed there. So really take damage is just updating with this else statement and this if statement mentioned up above. All right. Now, with that, there's another thing we want to do using this new state. So we have hit stop that occurs when an opponent is hit, or really when any character is hit, the timer and the time dilation of the world changes to freeze for a bit to make hits more dramatic based on the damage that is dealt and usually a world modifier. And that's how we did our hit stop dilation. But we also end that hit stop and resume the time back to normal, after a certain amount of frames. Well, again, just like we were talking about above, we don't necessarily want the hit stop to occur during the supers. I mean, you can have it occur, and there's not an issue with that. But if you don't want it to occur, and you want it to be based off of just the animation alone, like a lot of supers and critical arts are, again, I'm thinking of Street Fighter V here, but there's plenty of games that do it, then we don't want to set the timer back to active when the hit stop is finished. So the hit stop is already going to end when the timer is up. We're not creating or adding any more hit stop because of the logic we've edited in take damage. We don't do all this logic now. You'll notice that begin hit stop was not in this else statement. However, end hit stop can still be called because that comes from the game mode. We determine if the hit stop should occur or if it should be reset back to normal. we don't want to call end hit stop and reset the timer when hits occur during the super move. We want it to be toggled off the entire time. So with that, what we need to do is just add an additional condition here. So where we were setting the timer to be active, we just need to make sure before we do this that the combo state of the player that this is checking against is not super. The other player's combo state is not super. And then I've added some additional states as well, just because I picked up on a bug along the way. Whenever a round ends, we also don't want the timer to become active right away. And so I make sure that we have not lost the round and the other player has not lost the round. If you add these 4 states, the timer should work as intended throughout this process. We won't accidentally set the timer back to be active when we don't want it to. All right. Now, the next thing we need to worry about is actually using our meter amount and comparing it to the amount of meter, the required meter, that the commands require us to have before we can use them. I'm only putting on the super move for now, but remember, meter burn attacks in general will use this functionality, so this is actually going to work in multiple places, and we'll use this later. So, in check input buffer for command using type, basically our huge function where we check to make sure all of our commands are actually functioning properly. In this function, we're only going to be adding one thing today. Okay? And it's this if statement here. So as soon as when we're looping through the commands, as soon as we get to the command here. So as soon as we have current command, I check this. This is because for performance reasons, we don't want to loop through commands we know that we won't be able to perform. So if we only check commands that we know we have enough meter to perform, we can eliminate additional entries and save ourselves some performance and loop less iterations, which will be better for our game. So as soon as we enter this for loop and get the command that we're on, I make sure that the amount of super meter that the player has is greater than or equal to the current command's required meter. If it's equal to it, it would use all of it, but then it should still be able to be performed. If it's greater than it, we'll have some left over, but yes, of course we can then perform the move because we have more than we need. Nothing else has to be changed. Just make sure you get your bracket in the correct spot here. So we have this if directly under the for loop, and then you can click to the left of a bracket. It will highlight blue, and then it will highlight your other bracket, your corresponding bracket blue as well. For functions that are complicated like this, you'll want to do this. So once you add the if in here, you'll follow it down. You'll notice it's my third bracket in. If you have other conditions, other logic in here, yours could be different, but just make sure you do get that correct, as if you mess it up, put it in the wrong spot, it could actually screw up your logic depending on what you have going there. And I just want to teach you that little trick about the brackets because I have seen some issues with that, and I myself have caused issues because of that. So it's very important, and this function continues to grow. All right, now that's great, and that will only loop through the commands that we have enough meter to actually perform. That will help us out a lot. But one thing that won't do is actually take our super meter away. That was also never implemented after changing to the command list. So where we actually need to implement that is when we start the command itself. When the move is going to be used, that's when we want to take away the super meter amount. So in the function start command, I've added an additional if statement here, and then an extra line. I check to see if the super meter amount is greater than or equal to the character command's current command.required meter. This function is where we actually set the boolean to be true to say, yes, we are using this command and we are going to execute it. So to be safe, you don't have to do this, but to be safe, because things can change, things can change frame by frame in a fighting game. So if the super meter amount is less than the amount required to perform a command, however it happened, if we ended up falling below that amount, we probably don't want to use the move. It would be janky to do so in the game. So we don't have a scenario like that in this template right now, but for future use and updates to the system, we really don't want to allow that when we start the command. So I'm just opting to fix it now. Fix it before it becomes a problem. So I do this check, and then if it's true, I take away the meter. So the super meter amount is the amount the character has. We subtract the amount required for that command, and then we perform the command. All right, one additional note with the super meter amount is that we never actually capped our super meter amount or gave it any sort of ceiling, so it can actually just go forever. You could either do a clamp or just do the logic that we do for the player health, where we check to see if immediately after the super meter amount is added and take damage, and see if it's greater than the maximum value, which is 1.0 or 100%. And if it is, then we reset it to the maximum value, which is, again, 1.0. If you do go this method, then all you have to do is update it here and take damage when the player is not blocking an attack. Then if you scroll down, where we add the super meter to the other player, because both players get a little bit, the player that gets damaged actually gets more than the player that is dealing the damage, kind of as a comeback mechanic. But both players get it. And here, the other player's super meter amount gets added, a specific value. And we don't ever see and make sure that it doesn't go above 1 or clamp it. So you can just do the same logic here. If the super meter amount is greater than 1.0, it's equal to 1.0. All right. And with that, everything in the code should be fixed up. So we can open up the editor and we can go into our mutant BP or whatever characters you want and go to your commands. They will now have a new variable here in each of your commands. To open up this panel, you just click class defaults, by the way. And once you're here in your character commands, you can set your required meter for each of your attacks. Now, I haven't set a default, so in Unreal, it will default to 0.0 without us actually manually setting it. So all your normal commands will still be able to be used fine, and of course, it won't actually get rid of any of your meter. But for special attacks that you want to have meter, so your meter burn attacks, your super and special and ultimate moves, then you'll want to put a value in here. Just for now, as an example, I put the special attack to be 1.0 or 100% of the meter to execute. That could change, but for the overall special, usually I think that is the whole meter. In a lot of games that I played, it is anyway. And so I'm going to keep it that way. We'll go over different values with the other meter burn attacks when we get there. Now, you'll want to go into your NMBP, and a lot of our super logic is going to be in here because we have to be very specific at each step of the way, what state we're on, and what we have access to at those states. So, in the previous super episodes, what we had set up was an idle to super ultimate start. So, basically, once this condition became true and we actually executed the command required for the super move, we would go into the super ultimate start. Now, in here, it's just a basic animation, and this is my startup for my super move. This is what happens when I enter the actual input with my meter. So if we look at this side by side, I can give myself, whoops, that's the wrong button. I can give myself meter, and then I can use this. You'll see that's the animation right there. So that's the startup. Okay. So we go into that state, and that state, if we look at it properly, has a start transition event called start super transition. This is important because when we start this is when we want to notify the game that we don't want the timer to continue counting down, and that we also want to hide the HUD. We don't want to be able to see the health of the player and the opponent, or the super meter, or anything like that to make it more visually appealing. That is a preference thing, and you don't have to disable it, but we're going to do it here. So in your event graph, if you actually go to these events, we already filled out a lot of this logic in the past. We're just going to add a few additional things to make our lives easier. So, in the start super transition, this is what it looks like now. We were previously trying to set can move to be false, and that's good. That will stop us from doing a lot of things like jumping and crouching. But remember all the additional rules that we've added now for the combo state, E and super. So we have to make sure that we do that too when the time is right. That is not here. The start super transition is when we are entering the startup, the cinematic sequence to say, yes, we were performing a super. We've not landed any hits against our opponent yet, and thus there's no reason to try and modify any states. Specifically, we can't move at this point. Once we set our character reference to not be able to move, the next thing we need to do is make sure the opponent can't move. But on top of the opponent not being able to move, we actually opt to set their custom time dilation to 0.0. This will freeze them in place. So if you don't want them actually continuing to perform any of the animations they're in the middle of, again, say they are pressing their light attack, if you don't want that running in the super sequence here, then you should set the custom time dilation to 0. It will be frozen in place. This will stop them from moving as well. You can set can move to be false for the other player if you'd like. It shouldn't be required because we are going to be setting the states with all these are related to the super. So we have a bunch of different times we can edit the logic for each character based on the state of the state in the NMBP the character is in. So all I do is I set the custom time dilation on the other player to be 0.0, basically frozen. The way you get this, it's very simple. We have our character reference, which is an object to the owner of this NMBP. That then has an other player variable, which is a pointer to the other fighter. Lastly, you drag off of that and say set custom time dilation, and this will allow you to basically pick the tick rate. We've done this for other things in the series, but this is just a good example of where you can do it now. It's essentially the same as how we did our hit stop, just a little bit different because we're only worried about the opposing player being stuck. Now, another thing we've added is we actually have set the timer to not be active here. We do have the ability to do it in code, and it's very simple. We just change the boolean we have. However, we don't know exactly when we want to do it unless we're seeing it happen. This event that gets called, it gets called when we're entering this state. That's when we want to set the timer to not be active anymore because we're entering the state and nobody can do anything. We're just kind of watching the cinematic, so we don't want the timer to be active. So this is the perfect time to do it. And it's very simple. Our character reference does have a game mode reference. So you can actually drag off and get the game mode reference here. Or you could get the game mode and cast it to whatever game mode you're in. For the purposes of this series, we've only ever had one game mode. So this is the one we would use. And then if it's valid, we can drag off that. Either way you want to do it. Since I have this character reference here, I've just been pulling off of that. I think it is a little bit quicker performance-wise to do it that way, but it is up to you. And we want to set the isTimerActive variable that is in our game mode. And it's unchecked, meaning we're setting it to false. The timer is not active. If you look in the game mode.h, we have the isTimerActive boolean here. And it specifically says, should the round timer continuously go down at the current time? And no, it should not. So that's why we're setting it to false. Okay. There's one other thing I've added to this event, and that's this function I call set HUD visibility. We have to make that function. But basically, this is going to be an easy base function library function that we can call and automatically perform whatever action it is that we want to do. So in this case, we're trying to set the HUD visibility to be invisible. That way we can't see the HUD while we're performing our cinematic startup to our super move. Now, if you've been following the series, you'll probably have this. This is just a base function library. If you haven't been, perfectly fine. You can add a new file, add a blueprint, and add a blueprint function library here. This will allow you to create logic that gets called from pretty much anywhere in other blueprints. Either way, go into the new one you made or the one that you have, and we're going to add a new function. I'm going to call it set HUD visibility. I've also added a new input by clicking this plus right here, this new parameter, called it isVisible, and made it a Boolean type, which it actually will be by default. And this is what the function looks like. It's pretty simple. We're basically going to be getting our HUD and then setting it to be visible or hidden based on whatever was passed into this function. So the first thing you want is get all widgets of class. When you do this, it allows you to find all references to a widget type. And we've used this many times before. So what we want to find is our HUD, base GM HUD, base game mode HUD. But it's a little bit different than normal because you see this world context object. Since we're in a base function library, it does require a world context. However, luckily, Unreal is willing to give that to us for free. So all you have to do is type world context, get world context here, and drag it in. You can leave top level only checked for now. Doesn't really matter. That's if you had other widgets that were children and you were trying to determine if you wanted to get search for them and return them as results. You can drag off of the return here, found widgets, and type get to get a copy. If we've done all of our logic correctly, we should only ever have one HUD at a time. And so because of that, we can get index 0 here. Okay, that's how you do those nodes. Then all we want to do is drag off of our Boolean parameter, type branch right here. And if it's true, we're going to set it to be visible. If it's false, we're going to set it to be hidden. So just like that, drag off of your array copy here, type set visibility. This is setting the visibility on this widget that we found, which is going to be our HUD. So if it's true, remember visible, you can copy this, paste it. Otherwise, set it to be hidden. And that allows us to hide or display our HUD whenever we want. Now we can call that in our AnimBP. So all you do is search for it, set HUD visibility. It'll say base function library or whatever you name this file. And then you just click it and you're good to go. So I've left it unchecked because when we start up our super move, we want it to be invisible. The rest of this is stuff that we've done before. It basically swaps to the other camera, plays the cinematic sequence, plays a sound, and then does whatever we want to do on our character. Like I was doing pretty specific stuff here, so it's not really important to go over, but essentially we did everything required for our super entrance. Okay, so those are the changes we need when we start the sequence. Now let's go into the other states of the super. So super ultimate start then goes into a jab. Okay, it goes into this right here. Just a little stab with his hook there. And that is what actually determines if we land our hit or not. So if we play this again, we fill up our super meter, and then we use our super move, whether we hit or miss. Here's our jab. We do the jab after. Now, if that doesn't land, then we just go back to our idle. We used our super, but we missed our shot. However, if it does land, we then go into the super. So that's very important for that part of it. That's the whole thing, is that's the make it or break it to perform the super move. So the start then goes to the super ultimate here. This is, again, where we determine if we're going to land the actual move. Now, I have it automatically going there because, again, no further input is required. This is the startup. This is essentially the active. But we do an event on it called end super transition. So this is the next one we are going to visit. So go over to end super transition. Now, once this starts, we set the camera back to default. We reset the variables on the character. What we're doing here is we're going to be giving the characters the ability to move and perform actions as we see fit. Okay, we've ended the super transition. So The other player should be able to react if they can. If they're in hit, stun, whatever, they won't be able to actually move out of it and they'll get hit by the super. But if they can react quickly enough, they can back up and block the attack, or they can, dash away and dodge it, or counter it and cancel it. And so we need to give the ability back to the enemy to act in that short amount of time. So we were actually setting the character reference here to be able to move. It's not important because it immediately gets overridden, but it's what we've done, and I just left it there because it hasn't been causing any problems, and really it won't cause any problems because, again, it immediately gets overridden. But here's what we've added since then. So I've gotten my other player again, and I've reset the custom time dilation. Just like we set it to 0.0 before, I'm setting it to 1.0 now. So basically I've given them full control back of their character, and everything plays at the standard rate that it should. I've also gotten my game mode reference again, and I have set the timer to be active. The timer should be active now because the match is playing regularly. We're not in that cinematic sequence anymore. Also, if the player using the super misses their attack, then it's going to go back to the regular fight anyway. Nothing else is going to happen, so the timer needs to be active here. The HUD should also be active here. We want to reset that as well. And so, quite literally, all you do is you reset the three things that we did in the previous thing. Custom time dilation gets set back to 1. The timer active gets set back to being true. The HUD visibility gets set back to being true. Alright, let's look at the next state now. So now this can go into what I call the super ultimate combo if we've landed the hit. Landed hit is something that we've covered in the series. It's not new, but essentially if the hitbox that we spawn lands, then we can go to the next state. And so if the hitbox from the super initial hit here lands, we go into the combo for the super. This also has an event, as you can imagine. This has this start super combo. And what this animation looks like is this is the array of punches. All these individual hits, these are where we call take damage, each one of these. To make it nicer looking on the health bar, it actually deals damage as these hits come in. Okay? But the event we're worried about now is start super combo. So let's go to that in our NMBP as well. Start super combo right here. Okay, so we're starting off with some changes that I made. There is some stuff here at the end that we will keep, but let's go over the new stuff. So we had our character reference, and I'm going to immediately grab other player, and I'm going to set the combo state to be in super. As soon as this hit lands and this event gets called, that means that this boolean was found to be true and we were already in this state. So basically the same frame that the hit lands, this event will get called. Because of that, we can set the combo state to be in super for the other player, because we can only ever enter the combo state if we've landed that hit. So it's pretty much a done deal, saying you're in super. It can't be canceled. We can't exit at this point. That could vary depending on your game. You may have ways to actually cancel out of the super or some other conditions that stop it, but we don't, and I don't plan to at the moment, at least not for the generic super on the mutant. Every character could be different, and that's where the NMBP can also come in handy. You can customize the logic. So for here, we can just say set the combo state to be in super. Then what we need to do is, again, since we're entering a new cinematic state, we want to do basically the same exact thing that we just did when we entered the initial state for the super, where we want to reset the timer to not be active. The timer shouldn't be active anymore because neither character actually has control over what is going on. It's just basically an animation playing out. So I set timer active to be false, and then I set HUD visibility to be false again. These three things are all things that have been done in the other super episodes and have not been changed. Alright, and we're nearly done here. We have one more that we have to go through. So super ultimate combo can only go back to idle at the moment. And so because of that, we have to cover this event as well. So it's automatic rule based, so basically once this animation ends, it will return to idle. However, I have an event on it. I've changed the name. We were actually using this event right here and super transition before, but now that the logic is a little bit different, they actually are not the same event anymore, and they shouldn't be called the same thing. Otherwise it would be confusing and there would be extra work we'd have to do to try and break it up. So instead, I've just made a new event, return to idle from super combo. Very specific, and we know exactly what it is. Now, this is very similar to the end super transition right here. As you can see, I've actually copied and pasted. We do still set the view target with blend back to the standard camera. We reset the variables on this character so that they are ready for their idle state. We reset their ability to be able to move. But we don't need to do some other things, like we no longer need to reset the custom time dilation. And we are doing something, two different things here as well in this event. So you can basically copy end super transition, and we'll go from there. Where you set the custom time dilation, make sure that instead of doing that, we actually reset the enemy's combo state. They are now out of the super move. We just finished it. So they should return to, idle or whatever state they're in. Some critical arts and super moves will put you in a state where you're maybe knocked down or you get launched at the end. So you will have to work with, the specific move that you had to make that happen. But we don't want them to be in the super state anymore. They're definitely out of that at this point. Also, quick note, because I didn't mention it, if you need to find these anim notifies, I know the others we had already added in the past. All you have to do is search for the name, and you want the event. So event anim notify, return to idle from super combo, and it will come up here. But going back to this, you can see that I still have the same logic from above. Like I said, you can copy it. So the timer gets reset and it is valid again. So it is ticking again. And then we have the HUD comes back again as well. I've added an additional note here. We have this thing called the attack state now on our characters, which determines if we're in the startup, active, or recovery phase of our attack. Or none, meaning we're not in an attack. Well, we should set it back to none here. You don't have to if you handle it like you do the other hitboxes and those attacks. But since the super attack is a special move and is more cinematic and we can do kind of more customized things with it, to be safe, I've reset the attack state to be none, so I don't have to kind of fiddle with any of the logic. I just know once we're done with this, we're returning back to the idle state and we can go and attack freely as we want. Make sure if you are doing it this way that you notice that all of these variables come from the character reference. So I'm just setting the standard character reference attack state back to none. Now, I haven't changed anything with the actual combo hits or the combo end. I had a launcher at the end of this animation before, which I've actually taken out, but I didn't change anything with that. I didn't change anything with the individual hits. You don't have to, but notice this is why I was saying this earlier. See how maybe I have my damage amount here, but I don't want to deal with the hit stun frames or the block stun frames. I should be able to keep them at 0 if I want to. And that's why our enum in super really comes in handy here, because we do this if statement. Don't do this logic if we're in this super state. If we are, we don't set any of the stun values. We skip all of that junk. So these don't matter when you're referring to the super move. I can set everything to 0. It can be completely left alone. The damage will matter because we still want to actually damage the opponent. And so you just fill out the damage and the rest is basically just given free based on the logic that we've set up in the code. Okay, and that's everything that we need to do from the attacker's perspective. I did add an additional bit of logic here for our hit reactions as well, because what we were doing before is we were just allowing the state to go to the standard hit reactions based on the hit types. That's fine, but if you have a specific animation that goes with the super, which most games do, you have a corresponding animation, then you'll want to be able to play that. So to do that, I've added a new state to the NMBP. Right-click, add state, and I've called it Super Ultimate Hit Reaction. Now, first things first, I only allow it to go from idle here, but of course you will want to be able to go there from other states. And I only allow it to go back to idle. So let's look at idle to this hit reaction state. I don't have any events. Let's go into the rule. And you'll see that the character reference combo state equals in super. This is how we enter it. So basically, once the character gets hit and they get put into this combo state, we can go to this hit reaction state. Very simple in terms of logic. But what's in here is really cool. So if you click in here, let me show you exactly how this works. Now, in a fighting game, you could have many characters, and the characters will have different specials, different supers. They, a lot of times the hit reactions won't line up to the type of attack, so you may need to actually specialize the animation to work with the attack that they're receiving. Example, if a character kicks another character in the leg, and all you have is a high hit reaction where they, take a hit in the face, that's going to look terrible because they don't line up at all. Well, the same thing's for supers. If one of the supers is a throw, it's going to look way different than if it's a jab combo. So what we can do here, instead of having a bunch of different states, we can blend the poses based on either the character class or the specific attack. Now, if each character only has one super move that they can do, you can use the character class and you'll know what the corresponding animation is to being hit by their super. If they have multiple supers or attacks that are like this, then you may want to blend by the actual attack instead. That way you can take damage based on the receiving hit as opposed to just the character. So, oh, it's this super move, I know I'm going to do this hit reaction, this animation to go along with it. So in my case, all I have is the mutant. What we're going to do is grab that value from our character reference and then allow the AnimBP to do the rest. So we want to grab our character reference. We want to grab other player. And we want to grab character class. Like this. Okay, and this is the class of our character, or basically just the character itself. Mannequin, mutant, vanguard. Then what we do is we right click and we do blend pose by, and it'll be an enum, and it's going to be our E character class. You can search for it. It is in here. It will be alphabetical, or you can type it in and you'll get this here. You drag the character class into the active enum value, and then we can right click on this node and add pins for these elements. Default is if there is no specific element, so it would be a default animation. Mannequin is if your opponent is the mannequin. Mutant if your opponent's the mutant. And vanguard if your opponent's the vanguard. Then you pass in animations to each of these, and the final result gets put into the output. So again, we only have the mutant right now, so I've just given it a temporary one. This is our high hit reaction. I don't have another reaction file that actually goes with that jab combo, but I've just allowed that one to be the animation for now, and I've allowed the animation to loop so that once it's done, it can play according to the other jabs. So it actually looks kind of nice. You can even increase the play rate if you'd like to play more frequently, so it might look a little bit better. And then lastly, we should have the animation back from super ultimate hit reaction to idle right here. And I didn't make it automatic because we don't want it to run as soon as the animation is done. We want to make sure the character is out of the state first. So if you go in here, all I do is I get the character reference in the combo state and make sure it's not equal to. This is specifically the not equal to enum node. And I specifically choose the in super state. So once they exit that combo state, then they can return back to idle. Alright guys, so that's pretty much all we have for super moves. We can now enjoy all the features of them together as opposed to separately, and all this janky logic that is going to be separating us from what we want to see. We want the HUD to be able to be invisible. We want the timer to function properly. We want our meter to be used. And all these other things all are coming together to make an excellent super move. And everything that we've had still stays. We can still miss our super move and not go into the state, but we can also hit now and have a more cinematic approach with actual damage reactions that can fit with the character's hit and the health going down on time. Everything kind of flows together, and it's just overall a much better experience. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. So if I helped you, please subscribe. It does more for the community and myself than anything else, and it lets me know that I'm doing a good job teaching you guys about the fighting game and how to make one for yourself. If you had any issues with this series or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free, and I'd love to help you out. I want to give a massive, massive thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for continuing to believe in me and helping me push this series to the point that it's at now and much farther in the future. I love to see this series progress, and I can't wait to see where we can actually go with it. But otherwise, guys, that's all I got. Like I said, I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.